Hey, welcome to the Simple Nutrition Podcast, a show that helps you learn practical and actual nutrition tips from an expert. I am your host, Leonila Campos, a registered dietitian with over 8 years of experience in the nutrition field. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Simple Nutrition Insights Podcast. I am your host, Leonila Campos. And today we're diving into a topic that often sparks a debate: artificial sweeteners. Whether it's in your morning coffee, that 0-calorie soda, or even in your favorite sugar-free snacks, artificial sweeteners are pretty much everywhere. But are they really the guilt-free sugar substitute they claim to be? Or do they come with a hidden risk? Today we'll break it all down: the benefits, the controversies, and how they may fit into a healthy diet. So let's get started. Last week, I talked all about sugar, right? And so if you haven't had a chance to go and listen to that episode, go check it out. And I mentioned that in this week, or for today's week episode, I will be talking about artificial sweeteners. So first things first, what are artificial sweeteners? Simply put, they're synthetic sugar substitutes. Unlike sugar, they provide sweetness without the calories, which is why they are often found in diet or sugar-free products. They are a popular choice for those looking to manage their weight, control blood sugar, or reduce their overall sugar intake. But there's a lot more to the story than just swapping out sugar for a no-calorie option. Let's start by going over some of the most common artificial sweeteners you will likely come across. You've probably heard of aspartame. It's found in everything from diet sodas to sugar-free gum. Aspartame is about 200 times sweeter than sugar. So I want you to pause here for a moment and just think about that, right? Aspartame is 200 times sweeter than sugar, which means only a tiny amount is needed to sweeten food and drinks. However, it's also one of the most controversial sweeteners, with some concerns over safety, even though the FDA deems it safe within certain limits. Next, let's talk about sucralose, which is most commonly known by its brand name Splenda. Like aspartame, sucralose is far sweeter than sugar. It's about 600 times sweeter, to be exact. So, aspartame is 200 times sweeter than sugar. Sucralose is 600 times sweeter. It is also heat stable, so it is often used in baked goods, but there's some research suggesting it might not be as harmless as one once thought, particularly when it is exposed to heat. Then there is saccharin, one of the oldest artificial sweeteners. It is sweeter in those little pink packets. It's the sweetener in those little pink packets labeled as sweet and low. Saccharin is it has a bit of a bitter aftertaste, so it's often mixed with other sweeteners just to mask that bitterness. There's a long-standing concern about saccharin's linked to cancer, but after years of research, those claims have largely been debunked. We have these sweeteners, right, that are essentially sugar-free, calorie-free, and they are so many times sweeter than sugar, right? So essentially we don't need, like, if you think about, okay, I'm going to replace my sugar with these sweeteners, these packets, right, for my coffee. So when you think about how sweet they are, right, in a little packet might be about the same amount as, in terms of quantity, about sugar. So when you think about, okay, I used to use, 4 tablespoons of sugar, regular sugar in my coffee, I should use the same amount in an artificial sweetener. And that is incorrect, right? Because we already learned that these sweeteners are 200, 600 times sweeter than sugar. So you don't even need a whole packet, right? Because it's so sweet. But we might be used to that amount, right? We might be used to eating or drinking so sugary foods, right? Super sugary foods, that we think that we might need as much, but we don't. So let's talk about the benefits,
right? First off, calorie reduction, right? As we talked about, artificial sweeteners allow you to enjoy sweetness without the calories of sugar, which is great for anyone trying to lose weight or manage their calorie intake. For people with diabetes, right? Or someone that has glucose intolerance, right? Or they're managing their blood sugars, artificial sweeteners don't raise blood sugar levels, right? Per se, making them a safe alternative. And for our teeth, right? Unlike sugar, these sweeteners don't contribute to cavities or tooth decay. So on paper, it sounds like a win-win, right? However, as with most things, there's another side to the story. One of the biggest concerns around artificial sweeteners is whether they actually lead to weight gain, rather than helping with weight loss. Some studies suggest that even though these sweeteners don't have calories, they may confuse the body's ability to regulate hunger and fullness, leading to overeating later on. Basically, you might feel like you can have that extra slice of pizza because you saved calories with sugar-free soda. Now, here is the thing, right? If we do have that mentality, like, oh, I'm having, sugar-free this, sugar-free that, I can have extra calories here, right? And that kind of defeats the purpose, right, essentially, of having these sugar alternatives if we're going to make up the calories in other areas. There is also the issue of metabolism, right? Some research suggests that artificial sweeteners could disrupt the body's natural response to sweetness, potentially spiking insulin levels even though you're not consuming sugar. And while there's no conclusive evidence linking artificial sweeteners to long-term metabolic issues, it's definitely a topic that requires more research. Another emerging area of concern that there's a little bit more research coming out, but not a significant amount where we can make conclusions yet, is the role in our gut health. Some artificial sweeteners like sucralose may alter the gut microbiome, which could impact everything from digestion to immune function. While this is relatively a new area of study, it's something definitely to keep an eye on, right? Specifically more so because we're learning so much about our gut microbiome, right? And what role it plays in just an overall health. And so if this is something that we need to keep in mind, right? It's great to stay on top with research, right? Or just have that in mind. So can artificial sweeteners really help with weight loss? The answer, it depends. For some people, they can help cut calories and manage cravings, but for others, they may have the opposite effect. Some studies suggest that people who consume artificial sweeteners regularly may actually gain weight or develop stronger cravings for sweet, high-calorie foods. This is why it's so important to listen to our bodies, right, and how it reacts to these substitutes. Now, to further explore this area here, we understand that these artificial sweeteners are, hundreds of times sweeter than sugar. And so if we consume them on a consistent basis, right, every day, multiple times during the day, we're still overstimulating our taste buds, right? We're still overstimulating our signals, right? Our metabolic signals that says, oh, something sugary, I like it, right? And it almost triggers our response in the brain, like, oh, I'm really enjoying this, right? Something sugary, even though it's not necessarily sugar, the effect is similarly the same, right? And so we have these foods consistently. We're overstimulating our taste buds again, right? But also a response to them. So we might be wanting to have more of that, right? Or we might think, oh, I can eat endless amounts of these things, which is not true, right? It really comes down again to there is a time and place for these foods, right? For these sweeteners. And it doesn't have to be that we have to have them every single day, all the time, all day long, right? We still have to keep in mind that we have to have these balanced, well-balanced meals, because regardless of if they are sugar-free or calorie-free, right? If we're not having these well-balanced meals, then we have this other cascade of things that can happen, right? We're going to have cravings regardless. We're going to be hungry all the time. We're going to feel like, all we think about is food. So we still have to have these balanced meals, right? We still have to prioritize our wholesome foods and add these artificial sweeteners when it's when we feel that we need them, right? When we feel that we want to add something, but it shouldn't replace, right, our wholesome foods. Okay, so yes, artificial sweeteners may or may not, right, help with that. And we have to keep those things in mind, right? We might want to add more of these high calorie foods, right? Again, depending on how well balanced our meals are, how often we are adding these artificial sweeteners. In the case of people with diabetes, artificial sweeteners can be a safer option than sugar, right? Because they don't raise blood sugar levels or blood glucose levels. However, some studies suggest that long-term use of these sweeteners might affect insulin sensitivity, which is why it's always a good idea, right, that you talk to your healthcare provider, you talk to your dietitian, right? You figure out a way of adding them if it's needed, right? If it's something that you enjoy or that you miss eating, but you don't want to add it because of your blood sugars, right? You can work with your providers to add them in a safe way. Overall, most organizations, including the American Diabetes Association, consider artificial sweeteners safe for people with diabetes when used in moderation. Now, that might look different for each person. Again, this is why it's so important to work with a dietitian, right? To figure out what moderation looks like for your case. So let's pivot here for a moment to talk about natural sweeteners, right? There's a difference between natural versus artificial sweeteners. Your natural sweeteners are like stevia and monk fruit, which have gained lots of noise, in the past few years. And these alternatives are plant-based and often marketed as healthier than artificial options. Stevia, for example, comes from the leaves of the stevia plant and doesn't affect blood sugar levels. Monk fruit is another natural sweetener that is gaining popularity due to its zero-calorie profile. But the question stands, are these natural sweeteners really better for you? Well, they're still processed to some extent, so they are not necessarily whole foods, right? However, many people prefer them because they are derived from natural sources rather than being chemically synthesized. So it doesn't mean that, again, we can have endless amounts of stevia, right, or endless amounts of monk fruit. There is, again, a time and place where we can add them, right? We're not going to replace everything with and adding a whole bunch of these foods, right, that have stevia and monk fruit, because it doesn't mean, right, that they are in a way healthy just because they have these sweeteners, right? They could still be lacking fiber, or they could still have other components that might not make them as healthy as we think. Okay, so how do regulatory bodies feel about artificial sweeteners? According to the FDA and other international health organizations, artificial sweeteners are safe for consumption when used within the acceptable daily intake levels. These levels are designed to be much lower than what you'll typically consume in a day. However, because research is ongoing, especially regarding things like gut health, it's always a good idea to keep up with new findings. But again, to also really understand the place of either your artificial sweeteners or your natural sweeteners, right, when you want to have them. Because maybe, it's you want to add them in your coffee, right? Or you want to add them in your tea. Or you want to bake something, right? And you're like, I don't want to add lots of sugar in it, or I don't want to add these other sweeteners, or whatever the case may be. And you want to use an alternative, and that's fine, right? It really comes down to how often you're using these sweeteners, the amounts, right, and the frequency. Again, because it doesn't mean that because they are calorie-free or sugar-free that we can use endless amounts, right? Or we can just replace everything with these foods. We have to really understand that the sweeter that we have something, right, we're still so used to that, and we're not allowing our taste buds, right? We're not allowing our body to get used to something that is not as sweet. And so we're always going to reach for something sweet, right? Or want to reach for something sweet. So we kind of have to break that cycle, right? And so oftentimes it's a good idea to start there, right? Okay, I'm drinking regular soda. It provides zero nutrition, tons of sugar, tons of calories, right? And I want to start making some changes. Okay, let's switch to something that has an artificial or a natural sweetener that is going to help us with that specific goal, right? And oftentimes, when someone, let's take an example, someone wants to lose weight, right? And they are drinking their calories, soda or sweetening beverages or more of these other sugary foods. And we just replacing the soda alone, right, can give results because, again, it's empty calories, right? There's no nutritional value there. And so that is going to put us in a calorie deficit, right? But essentially, right, slowly we want to be able to move towards a more wholesome, more balanced plan. And then whenever we want something, sweet or whatever the case may be, we can add it, right? We feel comfortable, we feel okay with it. But we can't just live on like these either natural or artificial sweetened foods, right? Essentially, we're not adding nutritional value to those foods. And that can also affect our health long term, which is the next point, right? How about long term use? Well, the research so far has been reassuring, and we don't have all the answers yet. Most studies conclude that artificial sweeteners are safe in the amounts most people consume, but emerging areas like metabolic health and gut microbiota are still being studied. And so with the upcoming years, I'm sure we're going to learn more about these effects, right? And so until we don't know, it is important to, again, limit them, use them, when you feel that you have to have them, and focus on more of your wholesome foods. So what's the bottom line? Artificial sweeteners can be helpful, right? A helpful tool if we're trying to reduce our sugar intake, especially if we have specific health goals like managing diabetes or losing weight. But it is not a magic bullet, right? Just like everything else. Sometimes we want like either instant gratification or we want like an instant change, right? And when it comes to health, when it comes to nutrition, that is not the case. Each person is so different, right? And so you really have to understand your body. You really have to work with a dietitian, with your healthcare providers, right? To figure out a plan that is going to work for you. And so you also have to understand how your body responds, right, to these artificial sweeteners or even to the natural sweeteners. I've had lots of clients that tell me, when I have something with sucralose, right, I get headaches or I get these other symptoms. And some people say the same thing with stevia, right? So you really have to understand your body and you have to understand how these sweeteners are affecting you. So you can create a change or you can create a plan. So instead of relying heavily, right, on artificial sweeteners, again, try to balance your nutrition, right? Choosing more wholesome, more nutrient-dense foods. It may seem like, this is never going to happen. Like, is this even true? It is, right? We have to train our bodies. Again, you also have to give your body a chance to manage, to make those changes. We change our taste buds every 15 days or so, right? And so if you are changing behaviors, every time you get new taste buds, right, you get used to that and those new foods that you're adding. And so you'll get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm fine without eating sugar. And you add it again, and you're not going to notice that it's very overpowering because your taste buds have changed, right? Your way of digesting, right, and metabolizing these foods also changes. And so when you start adding more of these wholesome foods, right, again, you're not only getting nutrients, right, from them, but you're also helping your body in so many other levels. So I encourage you to explore how artificial sweeteners affect your body and to use them mindfully. It's all about finding that right balance for your health and lifestyle and what's going to work for you long term, right? And I do see this more often, but I want to reemphasize this specifically. Whatever changes we make now, we have to think about them in a long-term way, right? Not in like, I just want to do these for these next 4 weeks, right, over these next 3 months because I have that goal or because I'm going to be in a wedding or whatever the case may be. Because having that mentality, right, is going to bring so much disappointment versus, hey, I'm working on my health. I want this to be long-term because I'm tired of doing, going back and forth with these nonsense diets that I'm just tired, right? I know that it's going to take longer. I know that creating behaviors and creating new habits takes time, but I'm okay with it because once I get there, I'm not going to have to be fighting, right? Or I'm not going to have to go back to square one. So change that mindset, right? That long-term changes take time, but are actually more beneficial. Okay, my friend, thank you so much for tuning in today's episode. If you find this information helpful, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Also, feel free to reach out with any questions or comments, any suggestions for new topics. I love being able to provide that feedback, provide that education. You can find more resources, right, or on artificial sweeteners. And I'll put some in the show notes, right, so you can have some readings, some research to base this episode on. And don't forget to follow me on social media at Leonila_with_. No, the other way. I'll get it one day. Nutrition_with_Leonila. Until next time, stay healthy and stay mindful. Bye-bye for now, my friend. Take care.
This podcast, the links and resources provided are for the purpose to educate only and are not a replacement for medical advice or nutrition therapy. I suggest you seek out the help of a trained professional to help you with your specific situation and needs.